but your grandfather was the founding, one of the founding fathers of the State of Israel?
Yes, he was.
Tell us about this.
Yes, he was. The generation of my grandparents was the generation of the first Jews to take on Zionism as an ideology and take on this idea of establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And he was very active. He became a leader within the movement. He was a member of the de facto Jewish government before the State of Israel was established. And he was one of the signers on the Declaration of Independence when the State of Israel was established.
So that would be, that you can make a contrast, like, let's say he was like the Abraham Lincoln or the,
No,
I'm sorry, George Washington. I'm sorry about that. Like a George Washington.
Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay. And then from there, your father actually, he was the general.
My father was, yes, both my parents were born in Palestine, so they were the first generation Israelis, if you will, first generation Jews who were born there. And my father, as a young man, while still in high school, joined the Zionist militia. He became an officer. So in the War of 1948, when the Zionists occupied most of Palestine, he was an officer already. And then he remained in the military as a career officer, and by 1967 he was already a general. Mm-hmm. and a member of the Israeli Central Command, the High Command.
Now something happened in your life, something very sad and tragic, that your niece, she was killed by a suicide bomber, is that right?
That's right. Well, my sister came out, when she came out and started talking to people and answering questions, because there was a lot of press, it was big news in Israel. In fact, it was big news everywhere, all over the world, because she was a granddaughter of a famous general. And my sister said, first of all, don't talk to me about killing more people. The idea of killing people in response to somebody's death is despicable. And no real mother would want to see this happen to another mother. In terms of responsible, both she and her husband said, we hold the Israeli government responsible for our daughter's death, because when you maintain such a brutal oppression and a brutal occupation against another nation, when you take away people's land and you destroy their homes, when you incarcerate their fathers and quite often their mothers, when you shoot their brothers and sisters in their school, in the schoolyards, this is what we get. This is the price that you pay as a society that maintains such a brutal oppression and occupation against another people. There's a price to be paid, and this is the price that we pay, and therefore they both felt that they both held the Israeli government responsible, because the Israeli government is responsible for the reality that exists there.
Now someone just said that's an anti-Semitic statement you just made. Somebody's pointing the finger and say, this guy's anti-Semitic. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I'm Jewish, so being anti-Semitic is nonsense. Number one. Number two, being anti-Semitic means being racist against Jews. I'm not racist against Jews. But I am critical of the State of Israel. I'm critical of Zionism, which has really nothing to do with Jews, although they claim to. So there's nothing anti-Semitic about criticizing Israel. In fact, most Jews don't even live there. Most Jews never accepted Zionism, so I don't think that has anything to do with it. And it's a claim that's being thrown out when there's nothing else to say. When the other side, the pro-Israeli side, the side that supports the violence in Palestine, has nothing to say, they say anti-Semitic. Well, so they say anti-Semitic.
What if someone says, look, he's just a self-hating Jew? Have you heard this statement?
Yeah, well, I certainly don't hate myself, so that's nonsense. Yeah. And I don't hate anybody else. I think it's one of those things they throw at you when they've got no argument.
Yeah. What else? We're going to be getting into some of the top myths that are surrounded. I was telling you, I have a student of mine who's a good friend of mine. Hopefully he'll watch the show. And we've gotten into, this talk a few times, and usually, because this is a human thing, when you see children who are just being killed, right, and indiscriminately, and then people will make arguments like, look, we're the ones being terrorized, that we have to defend ourselves, right? This land, we came there, and now they're trying to force us into the ocean. So what do you say when you hear things like this?
Well, it's a complete distortion of the history and a complete distortion of reality. The only reason there's a Palestinian resistance is because the Palestinians were thrown out of their land, Palestine was occupied, and Palestinians live under a brutal regime which is very similar to the apartheid regime that used to exist in South Africa. Therefore, there is resistance. If that didn't exist, if there was no occupation of Palestine, if Israel did not violently kill and oppress Palestinians, there would be no Palestinian resistance. So you can't blame the victim for resisting. You have to look at what started the conflict. You have to look at the oppressor. You have to look at the stronger power, and the responsibility lies in their hand.
I just had a rabbi give me an analogy. He said, look, imagine you left your home and then someone came and occupied it, and then you try to get it back, and then they went to the judge. Have you heard some of these analogies? Maybe you can.
Yeah, that's assuming that, you know, that's taking it into a place which I don't usually go. That's making the assumption that today's Jews are really the descendants of the ancient Hebrews that used to live in that part of the world some 3,000 years ago. That's a bit of a stretch for me. And even if it was true, I don't think it. I agree with him. It doesn't justify. You know, I did not live there 3,000 years ago. My grandparents immigrated from Ukraine. Their parents, their grandparents didn't live there. And I don't know any Jew that can trace his or her ancestors back to the ancient Hebrews. So that's a lot of, you know, that's a lot of myth there. And I don't think it's relevant. The point is, the Zionist movement was a colonialist movement. It was brutally oppressive. And that is why we have a problem, and that is why there's no peace in Palestine.
We're going to continue. That's one of the myths, that the land was uninhabited. There was no people there.
Yeah.
So if there's no people there, it's not being used. Why can't we use it? So this is one of the myths that we're going to be clearing up here on the Deen Show with the general's son, Miko Peled. Don't go anywhere.
This is really quite bizarre, because all it takes is a little bit of reading of history to find out that this just isn't true.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for tuning in to the Deen Show. That was the general's son giving you the facts, not fiction. And I know this is a very sensitive topic for many people, but there is no anti-Semitism going on here. It's just education, and we want the best for all of mankind. So from here, you can go ahead and investigate this further.